Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Leadnap Gaming. Today we're going to be talking about the FR22 and FR24 VHF UHF radios found on the AJS37 Viggen for DCS World. I'm going to take a quick moment here just to let you all know. This is going to be a rather lengthy and technical slide deck. Down in the description below, I'm going to have a link that goes directly to the demonstration. In the demonstration, I will cover everything that you need to be able to utilize the radios in game as far as switching channels goes and reading the need board. The slide deck presentation has a lot more to do with understanding how the radios work, understanding where to get all this information from so that you can better use them as an expert. But if you're just looking for a quick how do I use the radios, go ahead and just skip ahead to the demonstration. In line with that as well, during my time in the United States Army, I did work in the communications field as part of my career, and probably about half of it. At one point, I was the acting battalion signal officer, and I was the NCOIC of our signal section through a good part of those years as well. So this is something I know quite a bit about, and hopefully I've imparted a lot of that wisdom into this slide deck. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. The FR22 is the primary radio system in the Viggen. It is a very high frequency and ultra high frequency line of sight radio system. It has 844 pre-stored channels. DCS does limit that number down. There's no need for all 844 of them currently. So output wise, the UHF is 10 watts, VHF is 20 watts. The control layout for the FR22 is actually really intuitive and it's really simple. Anyone who's ever worked with the SINGARs or people that are familiar with, a lot of NATO aircraft where you're just punching in the frequency, so you may take a CAS mission and you're talking to the ground controller and they just give you the frequency he's on and you just plug that into your radio. It doesn't quite work like that in the Viggen. In fact, maybe the best way I have to really describe it is kind of imagine the radio in your car. So if I want to listen to 106.9, right, I have to tune to 106.9. But and that's kind of, if you think about it, like how a lot of NATO aircraft work. You just tune into the frequency you want. And there's thousands of frequencies, so of course, why that just makes the most sense. The Viggen operates, though, like your car with the presets. If I want to listen to 106.9, I just hit the 1 button. Right, and it takes me right to that already set channel. That's the easiest way to understand how the Viggen radio works. Otherwise, very much like your car, if you want to manually tune in your radio, you're going to be turning knobs to slew over to find that on the transceiver. So the FR22 arranges its presets into 3 different groupings. Let's go ahead and talk about those now. So those groupings are and mind you, so the first group is known as special preset. This is how it's referred to in most of the documentation. I'm usually going to refer to this as flight, just because these keys are typically, the majority of them especially, are really just for speaking to aircraft in your own flight. You have a 1, a 2, and a 3 button. The 3 button doesn't have a 3 on it in the cockpit, just so you know. It's a glitch. But those are to talk to your 3 wingmen, and assuming you're in a 4-ship flight. So your emergency channel's on there and your manual input's there. So the guard channel is also the H channel. They're referred to kind of in both sets, so also just be aware of that. The next group is the base group. These keys are assigned to stationary air traffic controllers. So these are going to be all your airports, airfields, and any other stationary ATC guidance. And then the last is the group. Just don't have a great name for that. These keys are assigned for other flight groups. So AWACS tankers, not that we can aerial refuel. It could include the JTAC, who could also be on the special preset, by the way. You might decide to put the JTAC up on that just for ease, and you'll kind of see why later on. It could include the mobile air traffic controller, which doesn't exist in DCS, but kind of if you look at how the Viggen was meant to be employed, once airfields and airports were destroyed during an invasion, you'd have more mobile groups, and those would no longer be using those fixed stationary channels. So group assignments, thanks to Grumpf for this diagram. It's the only one in here I didn't do. And there was just no reason to remake it. So red, you can see the flight or special group buttons up top there. Blue are the base, and it includes the right knob. And yellow is the group buttons and includes the left knob. It is important to note, as you see here, the red one, so the special one button is pressed. None of the other buttons are pressed. You can set a different kind of setup for each of those three groups, but you can only be on one at a time. All right, the FR22 versus the FR24. So the FR22, as we established, is the primary radio. You can see it's more up front in your cockpit. The FR24 is the backup radio, and this is a really big point of confusion for people. The FR24 commands both radios. Now the FR22 is fully articulated, even though the manual input has a couple bugs. The FR24 is not, which you can kind of begin to see where there'd be a conflict there. If the FR24 controls both radios, then wouldn't that be a problem? Some users have reported bugs where use of the FR24 doesn't allow future use of the FR22. I believe I can't recreate that, so I'm going to go with it's probably a misunderstanding about how the radio works, but it could be a bug that I just haven't been able to replicate. I've seen that plenty of times. I have bugs every now and then that other people don't get. So this slide deck was created in December of 2018, so if it's a year from now and you're watching this, this may have been fixed, and it may be fully articulated at this point. So let's now kind of get into just some kind of general radio stuff. So VHF, very high frequency, predates UHF in use. It has excellent open air propagation and penetrates through metals and other physical barriers pretty well. It has a long range versus its power output, and if you remember, we have a 20-watt output on VHF. And it's used for most consumer radio use, so TV, radio. I would use the example of a garage door opener, though that might actually touch into the UHF spectrum. A lot of cell phone stuff. So not the extent in which DCS models this, I don't know, but in real life, if you're operating in kind of urban areas with VHF radio, there's a lot more room for interference. Now, UHF, on the other hand, ultra-high frequency, has poor open-air propagation and does not pass through any material very well, to include people. So before, with VHF, you have a 9-foot to 20-foot wavelength. In UHF, it's 1 to 2 feet. So you can kind of see the difference in wave length there and start to begin to understand kind of why things are the way they are. UHF suffers more from bounced neighbor frequency interference. So to explain what that means, right, is imagine on VHF, I have a 10-foot wavelength, right? One frequency above me, the wave is pretty significantly different from the one I'm on, if you think about it like that. Whereas, you go to UHF and we're talking 12 inches, which means one frequency above me is pretty close to the same wave. So you're going to get a lot more interference on UHF. UHF has much shorter range versus its power output. And remember, the UHF radio from the FR22 only has a 10-watt output. So, right now you're kind of looking at me thinking, why are we even using UHF? Well, let's kind of evaluate that, shall we? So VHF is going to be useful for long distance communication, right? If I'm flying across the country, I want to be able to talk to multiple air traffic controllers that may be hundreds of miles away from me. VHF radio is great because it's going to allow you to reach long distances relatively clearly. But sometimes that's not what we want. Nothing I found, the documentation for this talked about encryption. So, but even just from SINGAR's radios that the U.S. military uses, um, you know, you can broadcast on the highest power output, but you don't necessarily want to, because even though for US radios you're channel hopping over 1 million times a second, you're still broadcasting that out. So if I'm just trying to talk to my wingman who's only a few nautical miles away from me, in the air, then UHF is actually probably the more ideal method for doing that, because it means that my transmission isn't bleeding out across the entire battle area. So, those are kind of reasons why you would have both radios and would want to consider their use. If I don't need to communicate over hundreds of miles, UHF is probably going to be a better way to go. So let's quickly talk about line of sight. Again, the extent to which DCS models this is a little unclear. And really, actually, I can account for part of this not being in. So you can see here we have two receivers as we fly our Viggen, and there's some terrain features. So receiver 1 on the right, we have a clear line of sight to and we can communicate without a problem with. But receiver number 2, there's a terrain feature between us and them, and we can't actually talk to them because they're blocked. Now, while I'm relatively certain that DCS doesn't model this, in real life, things like clouds will reflect your transmissions. So you could actually bounce that transmission around that obstacle. The clarity of the signal, the strength of it, are questionable, the range. But again, I can tell you from real life that when creating communications plans for op orders, I had to work hand in hand with our intel shop, because I had to get the weather reports and understand how weather was going to affect our radio communications. I don't know that weather does anything to communications in DCS, but maybe one day it will, so this knowledge may help you. Some nap of the earth considerations for line of sight, and this is something that most pilots probably don't think a lot about. If you're cruising along in an F-15 at 15,000 feet, there's really not a lot that's going to be sticking up, and messing with your communications. But as Viggen pilots, we like to be low and hard to detect, which also means it's going to create problems for us to communicate. So again, you can kind of see here the ascending line of sight cone is dictated by terrain. So if aircraft are outside of that cone, you're not going to be able to talk to them. And again, we go back to, I don't know to what extent this is put in DCS, but in real life, your waves could still bounce off of terrain features, and depending on the kind of sweet spots that exist, an aircraft might actually still be able to get to you, even get your communication without being in a line of sight to you. All right, and a final UHF consideration here, and again, this is highly unlikely to be modeled because of weather variation and multiplayer, but the fact that clouds on my screen and clouds on your screen are in different spots kind of means that this would be impossible to model. But in real life, as you can see, VHF is going to pass through weather layers pretty easily, and UHF can be very problematic when it comes to weather layers. It may pass through, it may not. It may bounce part of it. Another important consideration to have in this is that UHF is very problematic, but really any line of sight radio communication can be problematic when communicating with ground troops in urban areas. I can even, again, with SINGAR's radios and manpacks, we had a lot of issues communicating overseas because buildings will kind of block that traffic, and SINGAR's power outputs on manpacks are pretty low. So I don't know that there's any issues in DCS with that, but maybe one day there will be, and then this is future-proofed. So there you go. So let's go ahead now and kind of talk about the special preset and flight groupings. So these keys are primarily for inter-wing communication and other vital communications, such as the guard frequency. Assuming a maximum of 4 aircraft per flight, each other 3 aircraft have their own designated preset, 1, 2, or 3. The M channel is your guard frequency, and the minus key is the manual input key to tell the FR22 to follow the manual input interface. So, understanding our knee board. So you can see here when we're on our radio channels page, The special flight block is kind of up here at the top. So you see special 1, special 2, special 3 relate to button 1, button 2, button 3. The guard frequency, which is the H channel down there at the bottom, is obviously the H key. The E, F, and G relate to the FR24, and we'll get into that later. To manually input, you'll press the minus key, and then you'll dial in your frequency in a 6-digit block. Your knee pad includes all the listed frequencies in the AM/FM band in the battle space, so there's really nothing too big to worry about in that regard. With the manual input, it is important to note that these dials are somewhat bugged and may not fully work via the mouse function. They actually all work, it's just they have very long, you gotta like super drag to get them to turn. Again, this is created in 2018. I know from the forums that Heatblur is aware of this and it is on their fix list, so hopefully that won't be a problem for long. Anyways, it is important to note there are 4 dials here, not 2, and you have to take a pretty aggressive angle in the cockpit to really notice all 4. So you can see here I've just labeled them left and right controls, 2 being the one furthest away from you, 1 being the one closest to you. So left 2 controls the first 2 digits in a range of 10 to 40. Left 1 controls the 3rd digit on the left, which is 0 to 9. And R2 controls the first digit on the right side, while R1 controls the last 2 digits on the right side in blocks of 25. As far as channels go, again, these are for communication with fixed air-ground traffic control stations. They're preset based on the area of operation, and the buttons are the A, G, B, CF, C2, and DE. So when using the knee board, and this is probably the most complex knee board use, the base selections are a combination of the button and the dial. So we're going to use the right dial, and we're going to select the dial for the ATC. So if we want to talk to, and it really sucks that I didn't just try to pick one that I could pronounce, Novorossiysk. That's airport number 3. So we're going to turn the dial to 3 to select that as the air traffic control station. And then they have 4 channels, the A, B, C, C2 channels, right? And you can see what they all are there if you had to manually input them in. And so if we wanted to talk on the 252 megahertz band, we would select C2, so we would hit the C2 button. If you wanted the C channel, you would hit the CF button. If you wanted the G channel, you'd hit the AG button. All right, group keys are a combination of dial and buttons, just like the ATC, and you would select the subgroup with the dial and then the actual aircraft in that subgroup with the button. Again, groups generally include all supporting and otherwise mission-oriented channels to include other aircraft, ground troops, tankers, and so on. So again, going to the knee board, on our radio channels, the groups block is down below. So you can see here that if we wanted to talk to the Apache that is Ford 11, we would select 6 on the dial, and then we would press 1 because they're aircraft 1 in subgroup 6. If you're never sure which dial goes to which, you'll notice that there are arrows under and above the dials that point to the button group that corresponds to the dial. So now on to the FR24. The FR24 operation is very simple. You just simply rotate the dial. Again, the FR24 commands the FR22 and the FR24. So when we're looking at our knee pad, right, this is where you see E, F, and G are defined. There's an E setting, an F setting, and a G setting. It's pretty self-explanatory. H is guard. Norm is the FR22's selected frequency. It shows up as LARM, L-A-R-M, in the Swedish cockpit, by the way. So just to kind of understand this, norm plus guard, or LARM plus guard, allows you to hear both the guard frequency and whatever frequency is set on the FR22, and you will transmit on the FR22. So that's why your pre-flight checklist tells you to be in that so that you can hear emergency and whatever probably air traffic control channel you're also set to. That's the only way in the Viggen you can listen to 2 channels at once, and you're limited to that as it is. In the demonstration, I'll go over more how this switch works and kind of the limitations and what you need to know about it, but it is very important to pay attention in that part. Alright everybody, welcome to the cockpit. Let's go ahead and do a brief overview. Now, I'm not actually going to start up the aircraft for this demonstration because we don't really need to. Right here is our FR22 control panel, the manual input panel for the FR22, the FR24 panel, and the auxiliary panel. So down here on the FR22, let's go ahead and bring up our knee pad. So special 1 would be my wingman, so I'm just going to go ahead and press 1. And now I'm talking to my wingman. If I had another wingman in my flight that was on special 2, I'd just press 2 to talk to them. Now let's go ahead and look at groups. So if I wanted to talk to FR22, I can see here this 4 flight is subgroup 6. So we'll just change this to 6. Right, now I'm talking to this group. And if I want to talk to FR42, I'm just going to press 4. And now I'm talking to him. Now do note that I'm no longer talking to anybody inside my flight. You can only select 1 button at a time. However, I can still talk to my air traffic control by selecting one of their channels, and then I can talk to FR41 by pressing this channel because I'm still selected into that group. If I want to talk to the Apache Uzi11, I'm just going to change this down to 3 and 1. There I go. I'm talking to him. The same would be true if I wanted Pontiac 11. I would just go all the way up to 8, and 1's still selected, so now I'm talking to him. Let's go ahead and talk about airfields now. So right now you can see we're talking to Krasnodar. Let's go ahead and talk to Sochi though. So for Sochi, I'm just going to drop down to 7, and then let's go ahead and talk to them on this B frequency though, 127 megahertz. Just going to press B. If I wanted to talk to them on the C band, the 39 megahertz, 0.6 megahertz here, I would just press the CF key. So if you want C or F, you'll press this. If you want A or G, you'll press this. Let's go ahead and talk about manual input now. So first, we're going to press the minus key, and that tells the system to use this panel. Right now, we're on 101.575. Let's go ahead, though, and plug in this band right here, 121 AM. So we're just going to keep that to 1. 121, down to 0, down to 0. So there we are, 121 AM, FM, AM. We see everything's an AM. So, and now we're talking on that band, which brings us down here to the FR24. So right now we're in norm guard. What norm guard means is that we're listening to both the normal channel and the guard channel. The normal channel is the FR22. So if I set my FR24 to norm, it means that I'm communicating and listening only to what's on the FR22. Norm guard means that you're communicating off of this radio, but you're still listening to the guard channel as well. So this is the only time that, for example, while I'm talking to Sochi Adler right now, I can still hear the emergency channel, which is this H channel. If I put myself to guard here, and this is just to kind of demonstrate this point, I'm now communicating on the H channel, the guard channel, from the FR24 radio. If I put myself to norm, and I put myself up here into the H channel, I'm now talking on the emergency channel from the FR22. And if I press the minus key, and note that 121 AM is the emergency channel, I'm now still talking from the FR22 on the guard channel, which again, the F channel is 121 AM. So right now we're communicating on the F channel from the FR22, but if I come down here and I drop myself into F, I'm now communicating on this channel on the FR24. I think that's where a lot of people get confused, because if you put yourself up here into F right here, and then you start trying to communicate over here, nothing will happen. You're still communicating on the FR24 because the FR24 overrides the FR22. So, just a quick recap there. Most of the time, you'll either roll yourself in norm or guard plus norm, right?
and then you'll use your FR22 to communicate with the world. Right now I'm communicating on the guard channel on the FR22, but if my FR22 is broken, right, I can pop down here and use my backup radio to communicate on the emergency frequency or these three preset frequencies, E, F, and G, to communicate with the world.
All right, guys, and there you have it. I mean, the radio's really that easy to use. So hopefully that clears up confusion and allows you to better use the radio as you go out into the world and do things. I know right now I'm in the middle of doing the red flag campaign for the Viggen, and being able to use the radio is actually a pretty important feature. So I apologize about my voice, guys. I've actually been sick for the last week and a half, and I haven't had much of a voice. I was really worried I wasn't going to be able to get this done, and actually it's part of the reason I went with this one, because the in-game demonstration for it was a little easier to do quickly. So not that it still didn't require a bunch of takes and everything, with my system fighting me every part of the way. So hope you enjoyed it. If you guys have questions, let me know down below. Comments as well are always welcome. I appreciate your guys' feedback. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and I will catch you next time.